Meandering 20 miles through Dover is a journey through time and the very front of a changing world. A beautiful trek made all the more worthwhile as the gray skies and rain gave way to billowing clouds and a cool late summer breeze. It's a place I have heard and seen images of since I was just a kid. A fairy tale landscape of white glimmering cliffs rising out from the harsh sea. A castle atop a hill that oversees the rolling farms and lush forests. And through the hazy mist in the distance, the shores of France. Legends and myths. All of the world is defined by them. An idea of a place that belongs to all who have visited and passed the story to another. Dover, England is no different. The cliffs would be the famed impenetrable fortress Julius Caesar would first chronicle. The stone walls of Dover Castle being host to the legend of King Arthur. Trekking through Dover, I find the fairy tales of my youth do not diminish. Maybe it's the pint, or three of ale I've had at the historic White Horse that give a romantic feeling to the sun filtering through the leaves. Or maybe it's the beauty of a place that has been so alluring to people since the Stone Age. The paths and trails laid here some hundreds, maybe even thousands of years ago, feel as much of the place as the cliffs and the castle. It's the same paths that the first people in Britain would have traversed as they discovered a new land. The paths the Romans would have patrolled looking out over the edge of their empire. William the Conqueror marched here after the Battle of Hastings in 1066. My path led me from the ancient walls of Dover Castle to the relatively modern, gleaming light of the first electrified lighthouse. Built in 1843, it was a testing ground for the burgeoning field of electricity and the hum of the world we now live in. I took a moment to snap a photo, as the clouds built into beautiful stormy plumes behind the beacon of white stone in a green grass field. I walked, scaled, and tumbled down the paths and passages that led from the height of the cliffs to the sea. The receding tide allowed me to venture across the beach, strewn with large white chalk boulders that have fallen from the cliffs hundreds of feet above. A cycle of erosion that keeps these cliffs the glimmering fortress jutting out of the English Channel. These cliffs were once the bottom of the sea. Millions of years of small microscopic algae called coccolilliforms lived and died, leaving behind layers of just half a millimeter a year, skeletons that accumulated and formed this massive layer of chalk. The Alpine orogeny mountain building event that built the European Alps also brought this seabed to the sunlight. Some 450,000 years ago, a massive flood from a glacial lake broke through the dam and left only a small bridge behind. 160,000 years ago, a second massive flood collapsed the remaining bridge and Britain became an island. For 7,000 years, the rate of erosion that keeps these cliffs white has been steady at 2 to 6 centimeters a year. But due to human activity, loss of beaches like the one I am on now, coastal engineering projects, and storms that continue to be stronger due to climate change, the rate of erosion has now accelerated to 22 to 32 centimeters per year. The towns of Dover and St. Margaret behind me will face unprecedented challenges as the sea comes to their doors. Our climate is in constant ebb and flow, with massive changes occurring seemingly rapidly on a local scale, and slowly globally. Cosmic rhythms like the Milankovitch cycle and terrestrial occurrences like mass volcanic eruptions all influence our world. But in the past 12,000 years, the climate entered an interglacial period. The global temperature normalized to about 13.7 degrees centigrade, and humanity grew into civilizations, a time we call the Holocene. Periods of temperature variation during this time, such as the thermal maximum, which saw areas in the Middle East become frost-free and cereals and grains were now able to be farmed. Or the Little Ice Age, which saw cooling and is why in Emanuel Lutz's famous painting of Washington crossing the Delaware, icebergs are depicted. All were within a degree from that 13.7 baseline. Julius Caesar was first to write of Dover, when he chronicled the towering white cliffs and the army of Britons atop them. The global temperature was estimated to be 13.97 degrees. When Shakespeare would write King Lear, whose dramatic settings and battles were on the high cliffs and beaches, fighting over the right to rule, the abuse of power, and the fragility of authority without wisdom, the global temperature was estimated to be 13.75 degrees. When the lighthouse I passed, the one behind me on the hill, was illuminated for the first time, humanity was rapidly industrializing. The culmination of 250,000 years plus of knowledge and progress led to that first electric light shining across the English Channel. The global average temperature was estimated to be 13.74 degrees. That lighthouse would, or some older cousin of it since the Roman built one, guide ships from the coast of France to the harbors of Dover and St. Margaret's. On quiet days when the wind blew from the south, the guns from the fields of the Somme could be heard. Listening between breaks of the waves, I thought I could hear them too. That generation that survived the mud and the blood of the First World War were, as the author and anthropologist Wade Davis describes, a generation of men that had shattered innocence and were numb to death, or what Gertrude Stein would famously call a lost generation. It was from this ash and bloodbath that was once called the Great War, figures like George Mallory arose. His experiences at the front and battles like the Battle of the Somme, which death claimed some 20,000 British souls on the first day alone, would lead him to make such remarks as, "I had learned to reason with the presence of fresh corpses." His succinct and poignant line after the war, when asked why he would attempt to climb Everest, "Because it's there," encapsulated the feeling of many Britons that survived. A focus on trying to enjoy life and push the boundaries of the human spirit. He would later say in a letter home from Everest, "We don't live to eat and make money. We eat and make money to be able to enjoy life." The Christmas truce of 1914, where soldiers on opposing sides of the trenches would venture into no man's land, shake hands, swap stories and trinkets, and even play soccer, was a brief glimpse of human kindness in the aptly named No Man's Land. The commanders and generals had to plead and force the men back to the killing. Enjoying life was the theme of those that saw and survived the brutal horrors of death en masse. The legendary author J.R.R. Tolkien, who also survived the Battle of the Somme, would make the hero of his works, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, a simple, small hobbit who, when called to fight against the greatest of evils, would do so at great pain and sacrifice, leaving behind the rolling hills of the Shire to march into the depths of fire, with the hopes of one day returning to that great life of farming and living at peace and harmony with the natural world. I wonder what his thoughts would be on the modern military companies named after objects in his works. At the end of hostilities in World War I in 1918, the global temperature was 13.78 degrees. When England was in what Winston Churchill would growl in defiance, their finest hour, the bruised and bloodied soldiers of the Allied forces were pinned against the sea and the encroaching Nazi army. The cliffs to my back were the beacon of hope. The sight of home, safety, and assurance of continuing on were just across this stretch of sea, that haze of white cliffs. I thought of who stood on these cliffs, hearing the cries for home from the boys fighting to see another day. And who saw the smoke from Calais as French and British forces fought for 4 days in hand-to-hand combat under the orders of every man to his own, buying precious time until the miracle of Operation Dynamo could save over 300,000 British and French lives. The Nazi Empire and the empires of Japan and Italy, whose clamor for land and self-aggrandized superiority would drag the world into the Second World War. They would collectively see their flags raised for a few decades. The ideas of superiority over the race of people and cultures from the hands of authoritarian regimes would fuel the fires of war, in which death claimed some 50 to 85 million souls. The horrors of genocide would see to the enslavement and systematic death of over 6 million Jews, and millions of others that were deemed dangerous or unfit. The British singer Dame Vera Lynn would sing of bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover. A song of hope, of a time when the sounds of guns, bombs, cries, and battles were finally silent under the blue sky of a world at peace. At the end of World War II in 1945, the global temperature was 14.21 degrees. I wonder how many mothers, fathers, brothers and sisters, friends and loved ones would stand on these cliffs looking out to mainland Europe, hoping to see their soldier come home. How many never would? These cliffs were once the edge of the Roman Empire. Hitler once looked across the channel at these cliffs as the Nazis looked to expand their empire in World War II. As England sought its own empire in numerous wars, how many generations stood on these cliffs looking out in hopes that their boy would return? The regimes of those that seek power and domination put those hopeful youths to the vanguard of their growing empire for the payment of glory. The Empire of Rome, which some 20% of the global population was under for a time, would last for a few generations before being fractured in two, and officially be dead itself with the falling of the Purple Cape of the Caesars in Constantinople in 1453. The global temperature was estimated to be 13.76. The British Empire that once encircled the globe would diminish, seeing its colonies that it brutally subjugated claim independence. Now a free association of states known as the Commonwealth is the vestige of what was the empire that proclaimed literally and figuratively that the sun would never set. At its height in 1920, the global temperature was 13.89 degrees. Even the United States of America, where I call home, had, and in many ways still has, an unofficial empire. The ideas of manifest destiny led to the near extermination of all native tribes and cultures in the United States, and the enslavement of millions of black people. The idea of expansionism would stretch from Cuba to Hawaii, Philippines, and Guam, seeing millions pressed under the machine of American progress. In the irradiated glow of the atomic age, the age ushered in by American scientists led by what authors Kay Baird and Martin J. Sherwin dubbed the American Prometheus, J. Robert Oppenheimer, humanity saw a massive leapfrogging of technological advancements. The resulting nuclear arms race at the end of World War II would, at the height of the Cold War, see some 60 to 70,000 atomic bombs manufactured. The global temperature at the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 was 14.36 degrees. Each generation thinks themselves to be unique. With each innovation, they are at long last modern and of the highest mind. But as I sit in a peaceful alcove on the sea, the politics and warmongering of those authoritarian regimes, seeking their cosmic blip of time under their flag of empire, shout and posture as false idols of strength and security. As we fight amongst ourselves and each leader and nationalist and racial or ideological group claims superiority, a Cthulhu of our own making begins its battle. In the HBO miniseries Chernobyl, the true but dramatic retelling of the Soviet nuclear power plant disaster of 1986, the character of Sherbina says, "Every generation must know its own suffering." I guess this is ours. A world that fights over the merits and science of the decay of wilderness and loss of biodiversity. As water scarcity begins to creep its way into larger cities and forests burn, the sea by which I sit will rise in the coming years. Storms more fierce than before will batter these cliffs, that impenetrable fortress. The warm, late August day that I get to sit here is part of the hottest summer ever recorded in the UK. Just as Chernobyl in the 1980s was born from the arrogance and ignorance of humanity, so too is the climate change we all must fight today. That change, that human-caused, human-driven, human ignorance of climate change, was the death of the Holocene, the fortress that for 12,000 years held and cradled humanity in it. Here, in the dawn of the Anthropocene, we have tools, knowledge, innovation, and means to collaborate and learn on a scale that has never once been dreamed of. We have the power to limit our power, the ability to look at our species and see the individual, and see the Earth, as Carl Sagan said, a pale blue dot. We just have to have the will. The global temperature is 15.3 degrees. But the sun is going down and I should keep on trekking. I'll keep looking for those bluebirds.